to everyone. Um,
Yeah.
Today, something really exciting happened this morning. Well, at least my morning. Um, so this person sends me a message. She tells me she's 13 years old and a Vietnamese origin and wants to become Muslim. And I gave her some information, at least on some things, and then um, just asked her if she was aware of all the different details, at least the main details. And she said she was, and that she's been reading about Islam for a while, and that she and her brother want to become Muslim. And I said, sure. Would you want to?
MashaAllah.
Just afraid she was afraid to go to the masjid because she was afraid that her mom would know that she had went. So I told her, hey, we could do it over the phone. You don't have to go to the masjid. So alhamdulillah, uh, there is another sister that I think it's fair for me to share her page so that you guys could like her page because mashallah, I mean, she has been inspiring a lot of people. And mashallah, I mean, she was really that person that inspired her as well. And let me share her page. So this is the person. She used to take classes with me, so I take pride in that. She used to take classes with me, mashallah. This is her, Marwa. That's not her official name. She converted to Islam. She's Vietnamese origin. She was actually studying in Minnesota mathematics and then became Muslim and went back to Vietnam and started doing her dawah in Vietnam and doing dawah online and doing all these videos. So that girl, that Vietnamese girl
Oh,
that
that's
told
amazing.
me,
So it's in
yeah,
the language too. MashaAllah.
right, in the language. So that Vietnamese girl that called me today and said that she was 13 and all of that, I gave her this website. She wasn't sure on how to take the steps, so she started watching these videos, and in just a couple hours later, she's like, "Hey, I'm ready to do my shahada." So she does her shahada over the phone, and subhanallah, I mean, it's really inspiring to actually see. And I would also say I'm really pleased to see that Gen Z in particular, we are seeing something that we haven't seen before. Yes, there is, I guess, this type of revolution, this type of, I guess, trying to go against the norm, etc., but within Gen Z. But I think the resources that they are using is giving them access to Islam as well. So, yes, it's giving some access to the wrong things, but it's also giving others that are looking for guidance. It's giving them the resources to find Islam as well. And we are actually seeing an increase in the number of that younger generation embrace Islam, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ وَاللَّهُ مُتِمُّ نُورِهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. They would have wanted and they had attempted and created a lot of plots in order to turn off and basically eliminate the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will complete his light even if the kafirin would dislike it, or even if they detest that. And subhanallah, you could see right now we're actually getting a number of different people from the younger generation, whether awakened about the political issues or even the religious issues or even Islam. So we had a number of different conversions just the past 2 months, I believe. I think I had almost three from that younger generation actually come to Islam. So this is actually really new. Usually it's more those that are in their 30s, late 20s, are the ones that are actually becoming Muslim. That's when I guess they kind of start looking for, well, their life, but we're seeing the younger generation. So I am really, really excited about that. This young girl right here actually became Muslim at 22. So please like her page in order to definitely encourage her and definitely, I'll give you her page. Here we go. I'm going to give you her page. So even the people on Facebook, please love her page, like her page, comment on her page, and inshallah, she will inspire many others. And of course, we don't have a lot of people that speak in Vietnamese that do da'wah, certainly. So she's this person that is doing an outstanding job in teaching about Islam and trying to grow. But she only has 48 videos, but already these many subscribers. So please share her page because we need to at least have her. And of course, those that are capable of speaking Vietnamese, having a good Islamic background at least, to be able to be the beacons to teach others about Islam. So please share her page and please tell others about it, please. So I'm just going to give you right there her page, and inshallah, you could share it and share it with others, inshallah.
MashaAllah.
Yep, we need to encourage those that are actually doing a good job and doing a job that I guess we wouldn't be able to do it. I
Subhanallah.
mean, we wouldn't be able to do that kind of a job because we definitely don't speak the language, and the language carries more,
Today
certainly.
I am going to share my journey.
The language carries more than just a way to converse. So it's not an issue of, yeah, well, let's find a translation, but it's also knowing the culture, knowing the mindset, knowing how to reach out to these two combinations of culture and mindset and language is actually quite hard. So if we have somebody within that community that can deliver the message of Islam, we definitely need to promote them. We need to support them. So even if you don't understand Vietnamese, like her page just to help support whatever she's doing, and hopefully you will get part of the ajr that she is getting for supporting others, and even supporting others, that is basically supporting Islam and supporting others to embrace Islam, learn about Islam. So definitely, even if it's not something that you might be interested in, but at least, participate in making that da'wah be available. All right, so right now we're going to continue, inshallah, with our tafsir, and certainly we were on Surah An-Nisa. We're just going to go there, inshallah. And we were doing yesterday, وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُهُ عَلَيْكَ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَهَمَّ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ. So that was the segment, and those were the ayat that we were doing. And we said, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace, and also his mercy, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace and mercy wasn't there, then the Prophet ﷺ would have either one, fallen in a delusion, and certainly they would be deluding themselves, and or they would have harmed the Prophet ﷺ. And the grace that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him is really that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed onto him al-Kitab, which is basically the spoken word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which contains the revelation, which is basically the Quran, and certainly the inspired visions, because we're talking about ru'ya salihah, and also the inspired visions in where the practices, in where the Prophet ﷺ himself was actually given the inspiration on how to interpret the Quran, how to interpret justice, how to interpret, of course, the principles of the Lord Almighty. And certainly the word عَلَّمَكَ مَا لَمْ تَكُنْ تَعْلَمْ, of course, this was not something that he was born with. It wasn't something that he had known before, but it was something that was revealed onto him later on. وَكَانَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ عَظِيمًا. And then it continues with the story of Bani Ubayriq. Making the story short, Bani Ubayriq, remember, Bashir, Mubashir, and Abshar, and Mubashir, Bashir, Bushair, and Mubashir. There we go. And the story of those people, that there was three people that basically stole some items from Zayd ibn Rifa'a, And we said that the Prophet ﷺ had actually denied or at least supported those that had stolen, or at least not supported, but at least stood against them. And the Prophet ﷺ basically thought that the evidence that they had brought against them was actually lacking. That is Qatada, and who's actually Zayd's cousin, or actually nephew, that the evidence was not enough. And therefore he ruled against basically Rifa'a, who was actually the victim. But then the Prophet ﷺ later, or within that time frame, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed that the truth of the matter is that the Prophet ﷺ was not accurate in that judgment, and that the truth of the matter is that those that had actually stolen were really those that Rifa'a and Qatada, or Zayd ibn Rifa'a, were actually that they were actually right, and that the whole story of Bashir and Mubashir and Bashir, well, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, that they were actually the ones to have stolen and revealed the truth about their nifaq, or about their hypocrisy. And we also went in details about certain things about the hypocrisy, the signs of hypocrisy, whether it's one, not acting the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I forgot to mention, because I mentioned it before, but remember there are two types of hypocrisies. There's a type of hypocrisy where the person is actually showing Islam, that they're actually Muslim, but then the truth of the matter is that they're concealing disbelief. So this is the part that basically relates to al-Aqidah, that relates to Islamic creed. The second type is basically called nifaq amal, the hypocrisy of action, in where although the inside is speaking of faith, in other words, they're believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but their behavior is showing otherwise. So whether it's lying, or whether it's betraying, or whether it's breaking promises, or whether it's, showing different attitudes of munafiqeen, or different attitudes of disbelievers. So basically that would be a sign of nifaq. Now it's important to say that yes, it is possible that somebody can be a believer on the inside and their actions are speaking otherwise, but it can happen that even if the person concealed faith, their actions showed otherwise, that later these actions will rub onto their heart and entirely wipe away their faith without them realizing. All right, we also talked about the part which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had exposed, which is when they were secretly trying to plot against the Prophet ﷺ and against basically the Zayd ibn Rifa'a, and including, of course, Qatada. They were plotting against them. But of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered that most of the talks that, and the whispers, and certainly the private talks, is most of it, because they're munafiqeen, is really most of it containing blasphemy. Most of it is plotting against justice. Most of it is basically not something that is considered of going in accordance with the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إلا من أمر بصدقة أو معروف أو إصلاح بين الناس. So the only things, and of course, when you look at the word illa is basically a preposition to mean an exception. So in general, most of the private talk is basically containing some form of harm, except that is man amara, whoever orders bisadaqa, a good contribution, good donation, or ma'ruf, or any form of good deeds, any form of encouraging others to do what is good, aw islahan bayna nas, or reconciliating between people. And we went in details and we said that there's a difference between doing qada, which is making a judgment on someone, and or between two, more like a trial, and between doing a reconciliation. And we said that when you're judging, the chances are and that you will be leaving behind a lot of animosity, and that if you're judging, you're basically here going to be, of course, ending up really siding with someone. And definitely, I think there is a hadith that's not necessarily authentic. It is within Hassan, and of course, debate about it, where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, من ولي القضاء فقد ذبح بغير سكين. What does that mean? Whoever takes the position of being a judge, then it is as if they have been slaughtered without a knife. And of course, there's a lot of metaphor here and a lot of figurative statements here. And the reason why is because the Prophet ﷺ was telling you that when you take the position, although many would think of it as nothing but an honorable position, something to be proud of, is a position that resembles authority, that resembles power, resembles certainly a prestigious position, etc. But the Prophet ﷺ was discouraging us from holding such positions because of, number one, that they were as if they were slaughtered without even a knife. Well, basically, that is to show that although it seems that the position is more of breaking or making this final word and cutting out a final statement, but the truth of the matter, that second that you thought that you had some form of a sword or some form of power, the truth of the matter is that this power could actually be used against you on Judgment Day. It could be acting like as if this knife or this, of course, power that is breaking or basically finalizing a certain statement and finalizing a certain basically trial, that you could be really in that, of course, statement and in that judgment, you could be really ruling against your own self, because and on Judgment Day, you had actually ruled and you may be wrong in this. And certainly you will find people that have a better way of presenting themselves, and especially if we're talking about lawyers right now, they just know how to cut corners and how to go around the law in order to prove someone guilty and someone innocent might actually be right there losing their rights just because you had basically ruled against their case. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, فَقَدْ ذُبِحَ بِغَيْرِ سِكِّينٍ, because without you realizing, of course, there's no way that you're going to have a fair judgment on all cases. Certainly, you will be making a mistake on some cases and end up really harming others, and definitely even going against a victim and siding, let's say siding with those that basically had harmed those victims, and siding with them and giving more support. This is really important, giving more support to tyrants against the victims. And without you realizing, your power could be a shield to give that is your power in a situation where you're a judge. Your power could actually be the shield that some tyrant or some oppressor or some zalim might actually hide behind. And I think it's this is actually also taking me even back to my professors, the fiqh professors, and the especially the qadi professors, the professors that used to teach us the matters that relate to qada, that relate to judging and all of that. They used to always tell us that that we need to be really careful when we would give fatawa, in that with experience, we will discover that many times the story that is presented in a form of fatwa is actually containing a lot of misinformation and, let's say, a delusion and some form of trying to make you, the person that is giving the fatwa, to say one particular thing, basically to support their claim, to support what they wanted to hear. So they're not necessarily in search of answers as much as they are in search of a religious shield, a religious power, and to give some form of a religious appearance to whatever behavior they are actually presenting or they're actually putting out there. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that at many times you want to remember that not because you might have had a fatwa that you had probably taken out of context or you had presented a story in a certain way, you got the fatwa and you thought, well, here it is, I got the fatwa that I needed. So it's really important when you want to seek fatwa that, number one, understand and read and learn about the case so that you would know what to present and what not to present to preserve your privacy. And number two is that you really need to be fair in how you present the case. And for those that probably had a degree in fiqh, I would say don't rush in giving the fatawa and don't rush in probably judging certain cases. You will make a lot of mistakes. You will have to learn and take it easy and learn how many people had become con artists in scamming even the muftis. And I will say scamming the muftis in order to get some information out of them. Why am I using the word scamming? Because when you scam somebody, what you're trying to do is really trying to get either money or you're trying to get some information, basically to use for your own interest. And of course, it becomes some form of I guess, benefit. And that's the same thing. Some people can actually come forward seeking a fatwa, not because they really want a fatwa, as much as that they want to give themselves a religious authority that what they're doing is somehow supported by God, by the divine, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they want to present themselves that way. They recognize that they are guilty, but they want to convince themselves that they're not guilty. And here's a religious proof for what I'm doing. And this is a form of I would say a form of definitely scamming because they're using the information, the interest, the benefit, the authority that you're basically representing in order to give them authority. So it's really important to have that experience and very important to not be fast in judging, especially if we're talking about marriage situations. All right. So this is important because when we're speaking about al-islah, remember al-islah is different than al-qada, like we said before. And I thought we had mentioned this one right there in where Umar ibn Khattab sends to a note to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari telling him that رد الخصوم حتى يصطلحوا, to basically whenever they would have people that are in dispute, return them until they would. So in other words, don't rush. And our professors would always tell us that in court, in Islamic courts, that many times, and even of course in non-Islamic courts as well, but Islamic courts, they may return a certain couple many times, really because what they're really trying to get to is giving them and procrastinating their time and giving them more chances to perhaps reconciliate. And this is very common that I would get people come forward. I mean, yesterday, I remember or the day before yesterday, this case where this person was trying to, I guess, reconciliate or trying to judge, basically confused everything and thought that, okay, my job is basically to defend this girl. And that's what he thought that he was doing. And the story is really silly, to be honest, and where with my experience, this is a very short time. So you don't want to rush in saying, yes, this case, that's it. We're going to basically rule that this case is never going to come back to life. And especially in marriage, it takes time. Within 2 years of marriage, you're still learning about one another. And many times we would get people coming forward and saying, that's it. I basically discovered that we don't click, he's not my type, etc. And then and there are all these images, especially within, I would say, the mindset of Gen Z, especially in where there's this idea, there is, I would say, influenced by social media on what marriage looks like, what life looks like. So there's there's the part of individualism right there. There's the part of narrative. There's a lot of focus on narrative and emotions. Number three, there's a lot of focus on feminism and what the dynamics of life and women's rights should look like. And of course, number four, there's a lot of that existentialism in where it's creating a purpose, not the purpose that you were created for, but it's creating a purpose. And of course, that had been, I would say, enhanced through social media mostly, in where, of course, wanting to rush things. I forgot to mention that one. Number five, wanting to rush things, in where not having the patience to wait for any contribution and expect everything to be happening and bringing in a good, let's say, a good result right away. So it's kind of like an electronic thing, and where I click this, well, I'm supposed to be getting my feedback right away. I've been patient. I waited 3 days, so it's like 3 days, 4 days. Really, you expect 3 and 4 days for a person to actually change just because they promised to change. In 3, 4 days, it doesn't go that fast. And at the same time, we're talking about individualism and, of course, narrative, all of these five things, they really act, and these five things, they really act as this, I would say, this claw that is really holding with a big fist right at the throat of this new generation. And it's really killing them. It is really killing them. And many times I would like to, go back to what our professors used to say, is that many times we would see the younger generation actually not recognizing these areas, and then they would basically expect change to happen right away. So it's really important to recognize that when in situations people are rushing, a woman would come and rush and say, I want a divorce right now. I can't handle another day living with him, etc. And the man, that's it. I want to divorce this woman. I can't handle living with her, etc. And of course, this actually comes from the whole system that we're living in where it's wanting the change to happen right away. It's wanting to basically get to the fruit right away. So there's no patience. I want everything to end right away. And of course, it's very common that people would say, well, how can I help this woman? I just want her to get a divorce right now and save her. And when in reality, what they may not recognize is that when they thought that they were saving the person, what they were doing was really exactly like a person going to the water and trying to protect a fish from drowning. So what they do is they get her out of water, or they get the fish out of water. What they had really done is not save the fish, but they had actually just killed the fish. They had just killed the fish by getting the fish out of the water. So you have to understand that the context that somebody is in is not necessarily the context that you would vision based on your situation would be an ideal situation. You are a human being. This is your ideal situation. Her ideal situation could actually be what is ideal for her, could actually be something different. So don't rush and let me get her, out of this marriage. If, okay, talaq is not possible, well, I'm going to get her a khula. And then what you might not recognize is that it is exactly like somebody coming in so angry. And many times they would tell me, why don't you tell her that she can get khula? I would like, there's supposed to be wisdom in what and how you present to the person and what options they would have. A person can be coming in angry. Are you going to say, just don't touch the knives? What are you doing? You're reminding them that there is a weapon that they could use. That was not smart. That was not smart whatsoever. Sometimes to stay quiet about something is to basically keep others saved, secured, and certainly protected. Sister Noura is saying right here, there's something known in Arab community that new marriages experience hardships too. So right now, so whether it's the Arabi, whether it's the Desi, whether, this is right now an international thing. This is not only Arabi. This is an international thing, due to social media, due to, I guess, the electronics and all of that. All of these things did actually make, I would say, the influences on people's behaviors, their expectations, and certainly the purposes of what they want from marriage or what they want from education or what they want from work, etc., actually change. It has become very materialistic, very selfish, very individualist, and certainly it's all about me. It's all about giving the benefit to me. It's all about trying to somehow get to becoming happy, and they don't understand what being happy means. So there's this, I would say, fantasy in that in social media, basically, in where it's like, okay, you make a cake and the cake is only baked in probably 5-10 minutes and you expect it right away. So why? Well, because you basically can speed up, or probably, here we go, it's like baking a cake. It only needs 5 seconds, or probably 10-20 seconds. And with the reels right now, boom, there you go. 20-30 seconds is all it takes. Same thing when we're talking about marriage. It's basically showing images, not images necessarily of hardships, but images of husband, wife, going from place to place, Maldives, walking in this beautiful, beautiful place, and just beautifully, couple where they're drinking this beautiful juice on some kind of a tropical island, and it's like, okay, this is what a happy marriage looks like, but not recognizing, well, that was just a clip that was taken out of many contexts to
That's
actually,
only in Jannah, right?
absolutely.
SubhanAllah.
There's, the context that actually came before all of this is that they were probably, before even going to take this photo, is that they were actually at each other's throats, probably just on the driveway, or literally, or probably, at each other's throats just a few minutes ago on whether they thought that that was too expensive, the dish was too expensive, or whether they can afford to go this or there or whatever it is. And of course, this is common, and they're not going to put that on social media, because of course what they're trying to get on social media is more followers. So the best way to get more followers is to let people, of course, experience happiness, experience fantasy, experience some form of pleasure, because pleasure is the best way to get money. Pleasure is the fastest way to bring about customers. And of course, pleasure, in selling pleasure, even whether it's a cup of coffee or whether it's something, so I guess, as drugs or whatever it is, or wine or whatever it is, all these different things, it's all about selling pleasure. It's all about selling entertainment. It's all about making you think of a fantasy that you will get this feeling. And that's why they would present this piece of it. They're not going to be presenting the hardship because they're trying to get money. They're trying to make money out of their social media. So, but of course, the consumers, that is the younger generation specifically, they don't recognize what is actually behind the scene and how much of investment is actually done in order to get to, even if it's a baked cake or even if it's a house that you're living in. They don't recognize that amount of investment. So when we look at إصلاح بين الناس, it's really important to mention فإن فصل القضاء يورث بينهم الضغائن, and we had went in details and said that if you were to put yourself in a situation of qada, when what you were supposed to be doing is basically trying to reconciliate between people. Now, this is extremely important because what you're trying to do is remember that by reconciliating between the two, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you is really the reward as you had actually freed a slave. And certainly, let's look at this hadith and where the Prophet ﷺ, this hadith, although da'if right here, and remember we talked about al-Haythami yesterday. So al-Haythami had said that Musa ibn Ubaidah is within this hadith. It is not an authentic hadith, but still you could see that بقية رجاله ثقات. In other words, we can consider that this hadith could be a good resource, at least in doing what is good. Let's see, that the Prophet ﷺ told Abu Ayyub. Abu Ayyub is basically Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. He told him, ألا أدلك على صدقة يحبها الله ورسوله تصلح بين الناس إذا تفاسدوا وتقرب بينهم إذا تباعدوا. He said, should I not tell you of a donation or a contribution that Allah and His Messenger love? Certainly, he responded right away, the Prophet ﷺ, that is. He said to reconciliate between people when they are in dispute, and you would get them closer whenever they're farther. So this is a sadaqah, and this is extremely important, and it's certainly the best contribution that you could invest in is really when a husband and a wife are basically in dispute, trying to not bring about a dispute, but trying to bring in their voices closer together. I actually want to take you to this hadith because this hadith is basically important, especially in the women's world. I want to take you to this hadith because this is very common that women would actually do this, and they would, what they don't recognize is that they're actually bringing about these differences, these disputes, and they would come in presenting themselves as nothing but trying to let this woman recognize that this man, of course, right now, everybody is acting like this specialist, and the word narcissist is the easiest way where every single person is right now, whenever some argument comes in, especially between husband and wife, then they would come in, this person would come in like they are specialists, and then they would basically diagnose and present the other person, especially it's usually a man, present them as if they were narcissists. And of course, narcissist is the easiest way to get out of narcissist is the easiest way to get out of appearing that you don't know what you're talking about. So the easiest way to present like you are just a specialist and that you are right there presenting in an educated way that this man is nothing but a narcissist. Therefore, there is no way that you can save your marriage, that these narcissists are nothing but people that are coming at you, and therefore you got to leave this man, you got to leave this marriage, etc. And right now, the word narcissist is really being used left and right left and right, and everybody, even on social media, you would always see narcissist. Everybody is just becoming all of a sudden an expert on what makes narcissism and what really narcissism is. It's really important to mention that certain descriptions that I had realized that would be describing a narcissist, many times it would actually be a fine line between al-qawama or al-qawama and also what is described as a narcissist. Because when you're looking at al-qawama, definitely al-qawama is going to have some form of authority, is going to be some form of power that they're supposed to be dictating certain things. And certainly it's going to be not only bring benefit to the children, but even bring benefit to himself as well. So there's this fine line in where if the person were to always judge that if this man is basically acting as his masculine side, that is narcissist, that there's a really big problem. Certainly it's not part of al-qawama whatsoever, because that is the reality in narcissists, but there's not part of qawama that the man would, or at least this person would abuse the person and get them out as if they are, and of course that person is the victim, and then that person basically, which is the victim, would later be attacked, and a lot of these lies would basically be coming at them, and they would storm them with all these lies just because to them this person came in and attacked them, and all of these different claims would basically be invented by this narcissist person. So this is not whatsoever qawama. I'm not saying that narcissism is qawama whatsoever. I'm basically saying that there are certain fine lines, and that many times people can confuse certain behaviors that are part of masculinity, part of qawama, can easily confuse them with narcissism. And then we end up with a society that is, I would say, painting in brushing every single trait of masculinity as narcissism, and we end up really stripping our children and our boys away from that level or that responsibility, because we are telling them that this is narcissism. This is extremely dangerous. If we're basically confusing what evil, let me call it authority is, and we're confusing every single authority and the implications of that authority as being a narcissist. And of course, narcissism is basically aiming evil, but masculinity and certainly masculinity and certainly the al-qawama is not aiming evil, it's aiming good. But when you would come with these cases that would be presented to you, you don't know the intention behind this person or that person. Because you don't know that intention, and this is the dangerous part, because you don't know that intention, it's so easy for the other person to manipulate and interpret the intention and present that the intention behind this authority or behind this order or behind whatever this person is doing is that there's an evil intention. You as a person, as a third party, you don't really know the whole sides to the story. So therefore, the person that's coming forward to present this person as a narcissist, and many times I'll tell you, some people are just con artists, very manipulative. They can manipulate their own selves and actually manipulate you, and they can live a whole lie. They can live a whole lie. Those are the people that are narcissists. And many people that are coming in the image of victims could actually be the ones that are narcissists. So really, this is just to say, be careful, because remember, what you're trying to do is really bring about a reconciliation, because you want to remember, this is the hadith that I actually wanted to quote for you. I wanted you to see it, because this is a hadith we all have to learn, especially women. Let's look at this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, ليس منا من خبب امرأة على زوجها وعبدا على سيده. Not from us is a person that would turn a woman against her husband. I want you to look at this one, because if we are involved in a case where we are then letting the woman hate her husband, and right there doing that tahdib, what we're doing is really, when the Prophet ﷺ says laysa minna, that would actually mean that person is a hypocrite. So what you want to do is that your duty is to say what is good. من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت. Either say what is good or stay silent. You don't have to have an opinion in regards to each and every single argument. Just recognize that you're human and recognize that there are certain things, staying silent about it is better than saying anything. So that's why when you look at many times what, even therapists, they would right now come in and present themselves as if they were the experts, telling the women to divorce their husbands because, yep, this woman is coming in, this person is a narcissist, therefore there's no cure for this person. The best thing to do is really leave this marriage. And we're seeing more and more women actually being, let me call it, in a state of tahbib, where she was basically khubbibat, she was basically turned away from her husband, really through a therapist or a friend. And it was really something that, they had presented as if it was an educational thing, as if it was a study that was done, as if it was some form of a wisdom, that she's basically concerned about her interest and acts exactly like the person that was fearful over a fish from drowning. Boom, gets it out of water and kills it. All right, so let's go for the other part, in where al-Awza'i, who's al-Awza'i? Just an idea about al-Awza'i. Al-Awza'i was a scholar from Lebanon, and al-Awza'i, maybe we could actually take you there so you could just get an idea about al-Awza'i, because I don't want to quote scholars and you don't know who these scholars are, but I think it's important that we recognize the importance and who these scholars are in order for us to learn, rather than just quote and blindly not know who these people are. So al-Awza'i, just an idea. Let's see, al-Awza'i, basically, here we go, born in Lebanon, died in 774 Hijriya. 774 Hijriya, that's when he died. Baalbek is really on the borders, really near Syria. I went there. Well, at least went near Baalbek, not in Baalbek, but close to Baalbek. And al-Awza'i was actually known as al-Hafiz al-Sham. He was known as Hafiz al-Sham, and certainly al-Awza'i himself, he basically had met a number of different scholars, of course, and it's really important. Hold on, I actually wanted to, let's see, I think there was a website that I wanted to, let me see, I think this was it. I think this was it. All right, so al-Awza'i himself, he was known as Imam Ahl al-Sham, and this is basically his name right there, Abdurrahman ibn Amr. And al-Awza' is basically a certain area in Medina Dimashq. So basically a certain area in Medina Dimashq, and he was born 88 Hijriya. He was born 88 Hijriya, and it's important to mention for al-Awza'i himself, he was actually recognized, and he had actually become a scholar from the age 13. Imagine that. From age 13, he was already a scholar giving fatwa. So just keep that in mind, because many times we treat our children as if they are not capable of doing anything. So let's see, here's Abu Radain al-Lakhmi. He said, أول ما سئل الأوزاع عن الفقه سنة 13 و100 وهو يومئذ ابن 25. So this guy is basically saying 25. In another resource, it was saying 13. But at the end of the day, just keeping, here we go, okay, so basically just keeping that in mind, in where we had scholars, even though they were young, but what they contained is vision. They contained a lot of ilm, and that's what Islam does. Islam basically enlightens even the young ones to bring about the best of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically given them the ilm of. Let's see, الأوزاعي said, ما خطوة أحب إلى الله عز وجل من خطوة في إصلاح ذات البين ومن أصلح بين اثنين كتب الله له براءة من النار. Said there's not a single step to the Lord Almighty better than the step of reconciliating between people. And whoever would reconciliate between two people, the Lord Almighty would decree that they are free of hellfire. They are free from hellfire. This is extremely important to keep in mind. Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir, just an idea about Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir. Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir was basically a scholar. I want you to look at him. Now, Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir, his father was a Sahabi, okay? And his father, that's his name, Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir and At-Taymi al-Madani, all right? His father comes to Sayyida Aisha and he asks for some money. So Sayyida Aisha said, I don't have any money, but even if I had 10,000, basically 10,000 dinars, or I guess the currency back then, all right, I would have given it to you. Someone brings her 10,000 just when that man just leaves, just right when he had left. So she sent someone to fetch him. He comes back and she gives him the 10,000 dinars that she basically was given. That is when this man decides, well, let me go to the market, and he buys a slave for 2,000 and then buys other items to basically start a business. This slave that he buys later becomes the woman, the mother, at least, the mother that had Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir, Abu Bakr, and Umar ibn al-Munkadir. Those were three scholars that were known for their piety. They were known for their religiosity. And Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir was actually known for a person that was constantly weeping. And even when he would cry from hearing Quran or from reading Quran or from having khushu', he would wipe the tears all around his face, just because he had heard that those areas that these tears would touch would not be touched by hellfire. So he just wants to spread these tears kind of like a blessing all around his face in order to protect his face from hellfire. So Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir was actually known to be a person of salah, a person of piety, a person that would always cry even when he would read the hadith. All right, so this is just an idea about Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir, just a fast thing. I think it's important to just keep remembering. The one that actually called him Ibn al-Munkadir is basically Abu Khaythama. All right, al-Bukhari, Muslim, and the Nasa'i, they actually called him, they call him Abu Bakr. Yes, they called him Abu Abdullah. al-Bukhari Abu Bakr. So they would call him frequently Abu Bakr. So this is just an idea. Let's go for Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir. Who are you? What did you say? We just said who he was. Now we're going to say what he said. تنازع رجلان في نهاية المسجد. He said two men went into a dispute in some corner in the masjid. And then he got closer to them. He said, I stayed with them until I brought them back together. Abu Hurairah was seeing him and watching him. Remember, Muhammad ibn Qadir was actually born 33 Hijriya. The Prophet ﷺ died 11-year Hijriya. So definitely Muhammad ibn Qadir was capable of actually meeting with a number of different Sahaba. All right. Abu Huraira was watching him and he said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, من أصلح بين اثنين استوجب ثواب شهيد. Whoever reconciliates between two people, they would be decreed the reward of a martyr, the reward of a shaheed. And of course, you could see here that he basically said, لم نقف عليه. Right? لم نقف عليه, at least in that part, that quote in that hadith, said لم نقف عليه. It's a way of saying couldn't find the resource for that hadith to really judge whether it is weak or not. But at the end of the day is that you could see right there, Al-Qurtubi wanted to mention it, and certainly of course here, Shu'aib al-Arnaut, when he said لم نقف عليه, he couldn't actually find the resource to judge it. وَبِتِغَاءَ. Let's go ahead with the ayah again. Right there, so أو إصلاح بين الناس ومن يفعل ذلك ابتغاء مرضات الله فسوف نؤتيه أجرا عظيما. Whoever would do that, ذلك was referring to what? The word ذلك or tilka would basically mean that or this. Okay, so ذلك would basically refer here. وَمَن يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ, whoever does this, basically is referring to either the sadaqah or the ma'ruf or the islah bayn al-nas, whether that's donation or bringing about good and justice, or whether it is reconciling between people, then that person, if they had done it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord Almighty would basically grant them a magnificent reward. So even if the previous ahadith were not necessarily at the highest level of authenticity in speaking about the importance of reconciliating between people, this ayah is basically saying just that. Okay, say it again. Even if those ahadith that we had mentioned are not necessarily authentic, this ayah is saying exactly what those ahadith are saying. In where if the person was doing it for a cause of bringing about a reconciliation or ma'ruf or bringing in justice, bringing in good, of course, this would, or even sadaqah or contribution, then at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them a magnificent reward. وَمَن يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولَ مِن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. Now you look at this ayah right there. This is a common ayah. وَمَن يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولَ, especially in Surah Al-Mujadila. مَن يُشَاقِقِ. The word yushaqiq, let me first, before I even go and rush in, bring in the tafsir, let me at least give the surface tafsir. Let's call it the surface tafsir. وَمَن يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولَ, and whoever were to dispute with the Prophet, peace be upon him, after guidance was clear to them, and they would follow the path of the other than the path of the believers, then they would be turned to what they had basically regarded as their authority, and then they would be exposed on hellfire. What sa'at masira, in other words, that's the worst destination that you can get to. So although this translation was very shallow and I would say probably not so accurate, so let's see what the accurate translation would look like. وَمَن يُشَاقِقْ. Of course, this is basically every time you would see وَمَن يُشَاقِقْ or وَمَن يُشَاقِقْ, that would mean this would include each and every single person. This is alfaz al-umum right there, in where it would include every single person that fits within this description would be included in basically the result نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى right there. This would be the result. Okay, so this is basically right there. This segment of it is basically saying whoever does such and such and such. Here we go, these two things. What are they? Number one, yushaqiq al-rasul. Whoever does this, number one, and of course, two. Here's number two. Sorry, it's kind of hard to actually write on that. Here's number two. Then the result and the consequence is going to be this. Got it? So let's continue. ما يشاقق الرسول. What does يشاقق mean? The word يشاقق comes from شقق. شقق means to tear. Means to tear. So when you look at Surah Al-Inshiqaq, it's basically talking about the skies being torn. Why torn? Because it's basically telling us that the skies are not a solid substance, but they're actually a different, more of a fluid, or not fluid, maybe, well, it's a gas, but it is more of a substance that is similar to clothing in where it would tear, leaving behind certain traces after the tear. So yushaqiq al-rasul would mean not tearing the prophet, but this is to basically mean to separate away from, to basically argue, to basically disagree, to separate, to split away from the prophet, peace be upon him. Because remember, ishaq, or when we're talking about a tear, we're talking about whatever you had torn, it basically goes into two pieces, it becomes separated, it leaves behind marks, etc. And then therefore it becomes harder to mend after the tear than before, of course, the tear. And it's a lot easier to fix something that was cut than actually something that was torn. So here, when you see yushaqiq al-rasul, yushaqiq to mean that they went against the Prophet ﷺ, even though they had actually been involved, they were within the Muslim community, but then what they decided to do was separate away. And the context of this ayah is basically Bani Ubayraq, the story of the Bani Ubayraq, the Bashir, Mubashir, and Bishr. So that was basically in that context, but it would be, remember, in Lugha Arabiya, in general, we said that in Tafsir is al-ibra bi'umum al-lafzi la bi khusus al-sabab. And of course, when we're speaking about, yes, there was a certain, at least, context, but that context does not mean that that's the only thing, that's the only context. This does not involve us. No. So anybody that fits within this category, this ayah would be referring to them. So this ayah, although it was revealed in the context of Bani Ubayraq, but anybody that basically falls within this description would basically get the result right mentioned right here. So
wait, sorry. So you're saying that this doesn't just apply to the people who are married?
No, this doesn't apply to the people that are married. This applies to
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. I just was trying to focus on what's going on.
That's all right. This is
So
actually
would this be applicable to the Shia?
يشاقق الرسول من بعد ما تبين له الهدى ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين. Absolutely.
Okay.
We're going to get there. يشاقق الرسول, they went against the Prophet ﷺ, and يتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين, they went away from the path of the mu'mineen, Abu Bakr, Umar, Aisha, Abu Huraira, all these different great Sahaba. They basically went away from the path of the mu'mineen. We're going to get there, inshallah. So وَمَن يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولِ, whoever would dispute, who would separate away from the Prophet ﷺ after the guidance was cleared to them. In other words, there's no way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually said, وَمَا كُنَّ مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. The Lord Almighty would not punish anybody until they received the revelation, until they would receive the prophethood, until they would have prophets bringing them guidance. In other words, in order to call somebody a kafir, they would have to have known at least what Islam is, in order to be considered as somebody that turned away, rejected faith. All right. So now the second segment is rather interesting. وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. How is that even possible? And what does it mean? And they would follow other than the path of the believers. So wait a minute. The path of the believers is something, is this an extra thing to do? Who are the believers? So now I have to believe in the believers? Before I was supposed to believe in Allah and the messenger, and now I'm going to be believing in the believers? What does that, how is that even possible? And why? What are we getting here? I'm going to clarify a number of different things. When you look at يَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, you want to keep in mind that when somebody is basically leaving the Muslim community, the people of Salihin, then that is a way to recognize those red flags that are basically distincting you, taking you out of the of Salihin. This is one way to help you know that you're actually out of the block. If whenever there's a gathering, the Salihin, the Mu'mineen, so the Muslims are making a gathering and you're joining another gathering, these are your friends. If you look at the names of your friends, who are your friends? If your friends are not Muslim, majority are not Muslim, then there's a high chance that without you recognizing that your heart is starting to adopt and normalize kufr. Because for a believer in a mu'min, they could only feel accustomed, feel close with somebody that is on the path of guidance. So this ayah right there, يَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, is really scary. And in fact, يَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, right there, this was actually a major resource even for the scholars that spoke about al-ijma', the evidence and the resource of al-ijma'. They basically had brought this ayah as one of the most important references that sabil al-mu'mineen, the path of the believers, is one way to find guidance and is one way to recognize what and where guidance belongs and whether you are within that circle. In other words, if your circle is not the circle of mu'mineen, then you had actually judged yourself. You put yourself in that corner, and therefore you're going to get yourself out of guidance without you recognizing. So let's see. وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى. So what's going to happen? Well, in that situation, those that basically found the path of other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other than the Prophet ﷺ, and other than the path of the mu'mineen, then of course, when they went to a block and they surrounded themselves with other than the mu'mineen, most of the times, in fact, 99.9% of the times, when we embrace any group, when we flock with any group, what we're really seeking is a form of interest. We're seeking some interest, we're seeking some benefit, we're seeking some position, some status, some kind of a peace in dunya. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is saying, نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى. Well, what you're going to get is that مَنِ اسْتَعَزَّ بِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ جَعَلَ اللَّهُ ذُلَّهُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. If you seek this group to basically be your authority, then in that situation, نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى. Then what you're going to be given is that basically becomes your authority, not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, you're left without the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're left without the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're left without the center of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're actually then left on your own to where? To face your own decree, to face your own decisions, to face your own consequences. And وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ. Well, and then the farther consequence is basically hellfire. Why nuslihi? The word nuslihi actually means to expose directly on heat. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. وساءت مصيرا, and that certainly is the worst of the worst decree, the worst destination that one can get to. I actually wanted to take you into another place that went in details. Remember, the other favorite website that I like is basically this website, the Tafsir website. And what they do, what I like about it is that you could actually go to the ayah. We talked about it before, and there is a very important tafsir. And certainly the tafsir, right there, you would have all these different tafsir. I don't know how much you could see because it's it won't allow me to at least expand this area of it. But there's a very important tafsir that I wanted you to see in regards to this ayah, and in fact, two tafsirs. The first tafsir I wanted you to see was Tafsir al-Biqa'i. Tafsir al-Biqa'i is actually an interesting one that I would say was not given the appreciation that it deserves. And in Nazm al-Durar, his tafsir is called Nazm al-Durar fi tanasub al-ayati was-suwar. You could see that ta actually means that's when he died. That's when that scholar died. And al-Biqa'i, he's from Lebanon. You could see I'm actually pro-Lebanon. I must admit, I absolutely loved Lebanon. All right. All right. So when he talked about this ayah, in where وَمَا يُشَاقِقُ الرَّسُولَ مِن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى, he had explained, well, what is the context for that ayah, and why was it actually within this context? And he explained that was because, remember Bashir and Mubashir and those guys? Well, what they actually were seeking, they were seeking dunya, but then that one of them decided to run away to Mecca and later ran away elsewhere in order to seek in Khaybar, to be exact, ran away in order to get some empowerment from those groups. So he associated and preferred to associate himself with those disbelievers and run away from the Prophet ﷺ. And that's where that context is that was sa'at masira. In other words, it's going to come back at you without you knowing. And what it's going to do is that it's basically going to be giving you really no mercy because you had chosen to basically go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You basically had chosen to go against the mu'mineen, against sabil al-mu'mineen. I actually wanted to quote one thing, but I can't find the quote, but that's all right. At least you know who al-Biqa'i is and how you could actually see al-Biqa'i. There is another tafsir that I wanted to take you to, which is called al-Tahrir with Tanwir. التحرير بالتنوير is for a modern scholar. His name is Ibn al-Tahir Ibn Ashur. al-Tahir Ibn Ashur, just an idea. He's a Tunisian scholar, and this scholar actually stood against, and he was not afraid to say the truth in regards to a number of different political situations that happened during his time. He was not afraid to say it. And of course, al-Tahir Ibn Ashur, it's really sad to say, listen to this, really sad to say, his grandchildren and his children are actually some of the most ardent people that stand against Islam. It's really sad to say that. To actually see, someone's own sons are actually standing against Islam, even though he was a great scholar, but they would, and you could definitely see how scholarly this scholar was. But subhanAllah, you could have a scholar, but then his own children would be otherwise. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, give our children hidayah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give guidance to our children and keep them guided, Ya Rabbi. All right. So what Tahir ibn Ashur, unlike all the tafsir. So I went through a couple tafsir, and Tahir ibn Ashur, this guy, maybe I could show you just he is modern scholar, so you would be capable of seeing his photo, right? Let's see, maybe I can get you Tahir ibn Ashur. Here we go. This is basically him. This is the scholar. This is a real image of him. All right. This is a real image. Let's see. So he basically was born September 1879, died in 1973. I was born 1979, so that's a couple years before I was born. 1973, August 12, 19, La Marsa, Tunisia. My husband is Tunisian. All right. So he was basically a Zaytuna scholar. And it's really sad to mention, is Zaytuna was, I would say, was facing a very fierce war from France, because Zaytuna was actually considered a beacon exactly like an Azhar, if not more. Okay.
Wow, I never heard of that university, subhanAllah.
Absolutely. Zaytuna was actually considered the first Islamic university in the whole world before even al-Azhar. So when you look at Zaytuna, France, and it's not just France, it's basically colonization. Colonization, whether we're talking about France or Britain, they were very what is the word that I could use, and an appropriate word, but what they really wanted to do in order to get a hold and control the Muslim world, they were doing two things. Number one is change the education system. Before, the education system was based on something called the Fiqh, where it was based on memorizing Quran, and then after the Quran that they would memorize in an early age, then they go in stage 2, which basically is learning fiqh, tafsir, etc., lugha arabiya, math, science, etc. All right. So then colonization, they basically changed all of that and used the schooling system, and of course embed within the schooling system all basically the new languages, the changed and reduced the lugha arabiya, reduced the number of classes in Quran classes, took away a lot of Islamic studies classes, and certainly kept on shrinking the amount of education that was given to the students, and certainly replaced lugha arabiya. If it was ruled by the French, it was basically replacing lugha arabiya with French. And if it was ruled by Britain, it was basically introducing the English language. And certainly there is an important scholar, maybe I could actually bring him up. And this important scholar, his name is Abdul Latif al-Tibawi. He was killed in London, by the way. Abdul Latif al-Tibawi. All right. And Abdul Latif al-Tibawi, this is basically him. All right, this one. Abdul Latif al-Tibawi, he basically, you could see he was actually killed in 1981. So that's 2 years after. And he actually wrote a number of different books. One of the most important books that he had written is basically in regards to not only Palestine, but it is in regards to education. Here it is. This is the book, Islamic Education. I read that book cover to cover. It's extremely important. And what he talks about in that book is how the colonizing powers were using a different type of an education system in order to indoctrinate the masses. In the later generations, because they knew that they would not be capable of manipulating the older people. So they would basically manipulate the younger generation. And by opening so-called schools, it was presented like if it was as if it was an education, but it was really an indoctrination. But of course, it was really in order to ensure that these people would be subordinated to the colonizing powers. And it was really interesting. I was sitting with this sister 2 days ago, a Malaysian sister that was explaining to me how the Malaysians also got the same system really in where in order to get Malaysia independence, they basically introduced and said, hey, we'll give you independence, but you would basically have to use our education system. We're going to be controlling the education system, number one. And number two, you have to accept to integrate basically the Buddhist, Chinese, and even the Hindus and bring them in within the society in order to make sure that they don't have a majority of a Muslim population, but a divided population of different faiths. Why? It's in order to ensure that there wouldn't be a Muslim unity and that there would be another group, another minority that is there, I guess, changing the situation within the Muslim community. So this is Abdul Latif Tibawi. He was actually killed, assassinated, really in London. And of course, a number of different people. Same thing with Ismail Rajil Faruqi. We'll talk about him later on, but let's go back to Tahir ibn Ashur. So just, mention this part. It's really sad that, of course, the education system had really stripped away Tunisia from a lot of its Islam. And that's why you would see the later generations many times they don't recognize what happened to us. They just basically live and they don't recognize what happened to our Islam, what happened to our Zaytuna, what happened to the Zaytuna that was considered a beacon within the Muslim world. Why is it right now not delivering the same Islamic ilm, the same Islamic law knowledge to the world the way that Azhar was? What happened to it? So right now you would go to Zaytuna and you would definitely see something totally different than what you see right now. Anyhow, to go back to his book, remember his book is called Tafsir al-Tahrir wa-Tanwir. His book is in 21 volumes, really. I have all the book, but they're in Minnesota, but inshallah we'll get them. All right. So he was actually speaking about something really important here, where he said right there in where looking at this ayah that look at this, and he said فَوَجَبَ أَنْ يَكُونَ اتِّبَاعُ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ واجبا. That this ayah, this is the quote that I wanted you to actually see, exactly this one. وتقرير الاستدلال أن اتباع غير سبيل المؤمنين حرام فوجب أن يكون اتباع سبيل المؤمنين واجبا. بيان المقدمة الأولى أنه تعالى ألحق الوعيد بمن يشاقق الرسول ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين، ومشاقة الرسول وحدها موجبة لهذا الوعيد. فلو لم يكن اتباع غير سبيل المؤمنين موجبا له لكان ذلك ضما لما لا أثر له في الوعيد. Now, I want you to look at this one. And of course فثبت أن اتباع غير سبيل المؤمنين حرام. فإذا ثبت هذا لازم أن يكون اتباع سبيلهم واجب. I want you to look at this one. Of course, he was quoting al-Fakhr al-Razi, another scholar, but it's really important to actually say that such a quote in where he too was actually saying that this actually proves that following the path of the believers is actually obligatory, and therefore, by definition, following the path, the culture, the lifestyle, and of course, certainly putting yourself within an environment of disbelievers is basically, by definition, if we're saying that you have to follow the path of the believers, then by definition, it would be haram to follow the path of the disbelievers. I want you to look at this one because this is extremely dangerous, because the following ayah is going to take us into is going to take us into something really important in where it is related to this ayah. So when you look at this, in where following al-ijma', following the Muslim ummah is actually part of the faith. And that's why even in Surah At-Tawbah, remember the munafiqeen that were basically mocking the believers. We talked about this before, that were mocking the believers and calling them that the people that memorize the most Quran are basically the most cowardice, the most wants to eat, the most wants to be away from really the battle, engaging in the battle, etc. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said and talked about them that لا تعتذروا قد كفرتم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, don't even apologize. You had actually committed kufr, even though they didn't actually mock Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They didn't mock the Prophet ﷺ. They mocked the believers. But what they really wanted to get to by mocking the believers is really mocking Islam. And that's the same thing. By a person surrounding themselves with other than sabil al-mu'minin, with other than believers, then that person had basically judged that their heart, their mind, their talk, their lifestyle, their behavior is closer to a disbeliever than a believer's. Then that's nifaq. That's nifaq right there on the spot. So does that mean I can't be friends with a non-Muslim? Now, if you're talking about a friend to actually mean an acquaintance, we would say, yes, you can be acquainted with a non-Muslim. Can I be a friend? Well, that's a matter of what do you define a friend? If you define a friend as a person that you seek advice from, well, absolutely not. Because you would seek an advice from a person that basically turns to the Quran and Sunnah as their place of light, as their place of guidance.
And that kind of goes back to what you were saying yesterday about keeping the secrets and that too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when you actually say, okay, it's okay to have bir, it's okay to love somebody, maybe it's a wife that's not Muslim, maybe it's a mother that's not Muslim, etc. Maybe you can have relationships with them, but when you're talking about seeking advice, when you're talking about seeking role models, if your role model is not Muslim, this is a problem. If your role model is not Muslim, this is a problem, because then you're considering as your purpose, as your goal is really similar to a person that is a non-Muslim, then you've got something to really think about. You've got something to work on. So let's continue. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bihi. That the Lord Almighty, and of course, let's go back to the ayah right there. إن الله لا يغفر أن يشرك به ويغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء ومن يشرك بالله فقد ضل ضلالا بعيدا. And that the Lord Almighty, verily, He does not forgive associating partners with Him, yet He forgives anything outside of that. Now that is in response that is this necessarily supposed to be that any sin that one might commit, that there is a chance of repentance, and that if they were to repent, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically give them the chance to basically get tawbah, and basically that's a possibility. In other words, sin in itself, although you may get punished for it, but sin in itself does not guarantee that you would stay in hellfire eternally. But shirk does. What is shirk? Shirk is in different ways. Just as, let's write it down, we did yesterday. We said tawheed is in believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the deity. 2, in believing in worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And worship, we said it means two and relates to things, whether we're speaking about ritual or whether we're talking about principle. Number 3, Tawheed would also involve the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they would be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that no one shares those names and attributes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they are for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no one can at all whatsoever take that attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or share the name with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this is shirk. If a person were to believe that somehow someone else, this person goes to, I don't know, a fortune teller and basically is asking this fortune teller to tell her whether marrying X or Y or Z is basically good for her future, whether he's the person she's looking for, etc. All of that, it's basically giving this fortune teller the power of knowing the future, or even thinking that the zodiac, whatever horoscopes, that they basically could tell us something about you, could basically tell you something about your future, etc. That's a form of fortune telling. That's a form of believing that stars, that fortune teller, people, whatever it is, that they basically have the power of knowing the future. Then in that situation, that is a form of shirk. That's a form of shirk. And certainly, if the person had committed shirk, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يغفر أن يشرك به. The Lord Almighty will not whatsoever forgive those that associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just leaving it at that. And of course, I want you to look at right there, and let's look at this quote in where أجمع أصحابنا على أنه لا تخليد إلا للكافر وأن الفاسق من أهل القبلة إذا مات غير تائب فإنه إن عذب بالنار فلا محالة أنه يخرج منها بشفاعة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم أو بابتداء رحمة من الله تعالى. What does that mean? He said, quote, our friends, and this is talking about Ibn Furak's friends, all right, but this is actually talking about all as well, not only the Shafi'is or the Malikis, but this is basically right there, the quote that the kafir is the only one that's going to stay in hellfire eternally. Yet, a person that commits a sin known as al-fasiq is basically, if they are from Ahl al-Qibla, that is, this person, they're committing sin, major sins, or minor sins. And when we say Ahl al-Qibla, this is not to say this person is constantly praying, but this is to actually say they're part of basically the Muslim Ummah. And they basically had died when they had not repented. This person committed major sins. They were fasiq. That's how deliberate and far they went with committing sins. They did not even make tawbah. Here, he says, فَإِنَّهُ, if then they are punished by hellfire or with hellfire, then they will eventually leave hellfire. In other words, they're not going to stay there eternally, but they will eventually leave by the intercession of the Prophet ﷺ or by the mercy of the Lord Almighty. And of course, just see that one. All right. And of course, a man, let me see. Hold on. I'll just leave that one. يدعون من دونه إلا إناثا. So what I will do, I will actually end it right here, because then we're going into, should I end it or should I continue? I don't want to get you all tired, but anyhow, so now, inshallah, we will continue. So right there, we will continue. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all maghfirah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those that would be as part of Sabil al-Mu'mineen, make us from those that would embrace hidayah by the Prophet ﷺ, and make us from those that would always do reconciliation between people, call for ma'roof, and order for sadaqah, and be amongst those that would give sadaqah. And barakallahu fikum. So this is just this segment, because tomorrow, the reason why I didn't want to start with this one was really because all of these are related to one another, and there's so much to say in that regards. So If I were to start here, then I'm going to take another hour. And certainly it's late for all of you. So if there are any questions before we end here, I'd be happy to listen to them, inshallah. I think everybody is like, you've answered the questions. All right. So, وصلوا على سيدنا محمد سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all the reward. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make you all from those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would shed his mercy on, and make you from those that would do al-ma'ruf, that would give sadaqah, that would do islah bayna nas, and those that would be gathered in Jannah. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.